Good afternoon, fellow patriots. This is Matt Shea, and welcome to Patriot Radio, broadcasting live from deep inside the heart of the future Liberty State. Sponsored once again by On Fire Ministries, in the legacy of Dr. Stan Monteith, bringing you the story behind the story and the news behind the news, where it's not about right or left, it's about right and wrong. It's about our hope not being in man, but in Jesus Christ. About not ending in prayer, but moving to action. Your kingdom come, your will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Father, deliver us from the evil one.
Welcome to Patriot Radio.
Good afternoon, fellow patriots. This is Matt Shea, and today on Patriot Radio, a potential dramatic development in the Middle East. The next 48 hours will tell if Israel will attempt to annex Gaza. Also, the Chinese may be silent a little bit on the world stage, but continuing to work behind the scenes. And with us today, our guest, J. Michael Waller, senior analyst for the Center for Security Policy, talking about the new revelations of Russiagate, a new Monroe Doctrine, or maybe a return to the original intent, and also what can we expect here in the next 90 days? As always, here at Patriot Radio, we want to bring you the news before everybody else so that you and your family can be prepared for the times that are ahead and the times that are already upon us. But you got to follow us on Telegram to get that real-time intelligence analysis and breaking news. patriotradio.us/Telegram. Also, we want to walk with you in prayer. And I do this every show intentionally, that everything that we do really is a ministry unto the Lord, including giving the news and geopolitical analysis. So you can click on that QR code or patriotradio.us/prayer, and we would love to pray with you about all of these issues and maybe pray with you about some issues you might be having in your own life, because we're all in this walk and this journey together. Now, your wisdom from the Word today is probably one of my favorite verses in the entire Scripture. And it's because it is so concise in the instructions for us as believers. And if you have never heard of 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 17, go ahead and bookmark that, maybe highlight that in your Bible. Here is what it says: honor all people. And the word for honor here is conveying more than just simple respect, but it's conveying the idea of publicly acknowledging people, honoring them for the place, the position, the anointing that God has put on their life, honoring them for the things that they've done, the good walk. And when you honor someone, well, it makes everyone edified. It builds up everyone, and it grows us together. In other words, it drives out disunity, division. Now, it continues. Honor all people. Love the brotherhood. That idea of love is agape love, or the sacrificial love. In other words, I would give my life for someone. And the brotherhood is the idea that Christianity transcends cultures, ethnicities, geography, socioeconomic status. It transcends all of it. And that we are supposed to have such a trust for one another in the spiritual leadership sense. We're not trusting man for salvation, not trusting man for strength, but we're trusting each other in the sense of, when I charge out of the spiritual foxhole to do spiritual warfare, my brother, my sister will have my back. The trust is that all of us will have a prayer life. The trust is that all of us will read the word. The trust is that all of us will have repentant hearts and a fear of the Lord. That's the kind of trust that this is talking about. So honor all people, love the brotherhood, fear God, and honor the king. Honor the king. Even if you disagree with the king, honor the king. And we do this in this time. The church is going to be given the platform and the spheres of influence to really see God's will be done here on earth as it is in heaven. And that brings us now to your daily intelligence briefing. Coming to us from the globalist front.
The future is built by us. We have the means to make progress on the global agenda.
Sam Altman sees 1 million GPUs online by the end of 2025. If Altman were to purchase the latest Blackwell Ultra GPU models from NVIDIA at $30,000 per pop, he is talking about $30 billion for the chips alone. The build-out cost for the data center is about 3 times to 4 times the cost of the chips. So now you're talking $120 to $160 billion. And the total spend around $500 to $600 billion in 2025 alone, and likely to reach $5 trillion by 2030. The scale of AI is staggering. The combined computer power by 2025 year end is estimated to be about 200 zettabytes, or 1 times 10 to the 21st power. It's a lot of zeros there, folks, and really incomprehensible. What that is designed to do, well, is to take over life as we really know it in all of its aspects. And again, at some point, and I think that point is now, we need to have the discussion, what is our humanity? What does it mean to be a human being? Right now, you see these huge spends. They're not going to invest that kind of money unless they've been assured a return on that investment. And that's why there was this meeting in the Gulf states earlier in the year. And you could just look at the list of names. Newsweek had a nice list of names that attended there. And those are the new winners. And they're ushering in the AI and robotics generation, this digital age. We've gone from agrarian to industrial and now to a digital age. What is that going to mean? Well, whereas the agrarian age limited the ability of the creation of armies, the industrial age really ushered in the age of empire. Now, the digital age, well, it's altering our very reality. Because again, they're trying to create a digital self for each one of us. And then know you better than you know yourself. Introduce stimulus, introduce information to get you to behave a certain way. So we need to be questioning everything right now. And once again, one of the reasons there needs to be trust and there needs to be agape love among brothers and sisters in Christ. Also, rings flying always home cam. Yay, that sounds like fun. A flying surveillance drone in your home. What could go wrong with that? Ring, the anti-privacy company. I love how Pat Wood phrases these things. The anti-privacy company that brought you always-on doorbell cameras has outdone itself. Picture a Roomba vacuum that hovers up from your floor and gives 4K images of your entire home. That's literally like bringing a spy into your house. You thought cell phones are bad. How about no more camera Roombas? And that brings us now to the China front. Heavy floods across northern China kill at least 30,000 evacuated amidst record rainfall. This is going to affect Chinese crop production as well. So we're going to keep monitoring this. But again, there's many factors now weighing in. A downturn in their economy, a strong U.S. president, allies that are surrounding them in the Pacific Rim, and now weather. Although some of the weather is not as dramatic as they make it out to be, all of these things are pressure points, including the corruption issues and the attempts to control by Xi Jinping what's left of the Chinese attempted empire. May mean war comes sooner rather than later because they're running out of options, and the Chinese Communist Party will go to war before it gives up power. Also, Trump says he's not seeking a summit with Xi, but may visit China. The president made the remarks as his administration officials held a third round of trade talks in Stockholm with the Chinese. He said that he might accept an invitation. He said, I may go to China, but it would only be at the invitation of President Xi, which has been extended. Otherwise, no interest. In other words, Trump believes the United States is winning. To that end, trade discussions Monday and Tuesday, there's actually an ongoing press conference as we're recording this show today. The United States and China have held 5 hours of discussions in Stockholm seeking to find common ground on tariffs and economic matters. Officials did not speak to the media after the meetings. And so the bottom line here is that the U.S. trade representative said they're not expecting any enormous breakthrough during the talks, and I would say that's absolutely true. Very unlikely. And why should there really be? You have two entrenched sides. One, Chinese Communist Party trying to hold on to its strategy, long-term strategy, and its legacy. And the United States clearly winning around the world. India, for example, was the largest manufacturer of smartphones shipped to the U.S. for the first time, accounting for 44% of the market. So that friend-shoring and that change, that shift now to better U.S. allies is happening. And you're going to see this have a massive effect on the Chinese. Also, China's increasingly aggressive incursions into the Indo-Pacific continue. Trying to project power into the second island chain is where they're going to go next. They've already tried to spend about 10 days away from home port. They're going to continue to test that. But we, again, may see something happen like a blockade of Taiwan, which the United States has practiced running with the Taiwanese. Two-front war, China's Russia and China global threat, the U.S. power. I want to talk about this. This has always been the plan. There are so many people out there that keep talking as if Russia and China can be split apart. Look at this, has always been the plan since the 1919 Comintern. We have to hear the people that defected, listen to those that were there in the planning meetings, like Anatoly Golitsyn, that defected to the United States, like Stanislav Lunev, like Colonel Lebed. We need to, or General Lebed, then when he passed away anyways, again, mysteriously, through a helicopter crash, by the way, not falling out of a building like is common, but I digress. The bottom line is this has always been the plan. They have always sought to create a world war. Now, that's not excusing the Western globalists that are trying to do the same thing, but this has always been the plan of the communists. And the KGB has never truly lost power. They've always been in power in the background. Yes, it's the FSB today, but it's the same people and the same legacy. Their progeny are just now stepping into those higher positions of power. That's why the PLA's Southern Theater Command releasing a statement today regarding this exercise that they had and the combat readiness patrols that are continuing into this next month is so big because they plan, if there is a blockade of Taiwan, for the U.S. to run that blockade. The Chinese now are analyzing this. And again, all of this points to China moving sooner rather than later, because the longer amount of time that they wait, the stronger the United States gets and their allies in the Pacific. That's why you're seeing some desperate rhetoric coming out of places like North Korea. North Korea demands U.S. recognize its nuclear status, claiming no negotiations. Why would we have to do that? We don't have to do that. They have no leverage over us. Also, now the Palestinian struggle is the North Korean struggle. You're going to see this happen, the red-green axis, as they try to undermine the United States by fomenting civil unrest through domestic organizations here, Marxist and jihadi. So these things are going to continue, but this tells me that this is desperation. They sound desperate because of the strong administration in the White House. Also, from Epoch Times, some commentary on China's role with Iran. China has officially designated Iran as its primary partner in the Middle East, following the signing of a 25-year cooperation agreement between the two countries in 2021. China relies heavily on Iranian oil. However, if the Iranian regime were to collapse, China would emerge as the biggest loser. The strategic accord regards economic, military, and security cooperation. And again, the reason for this is over oil. That's why regime change in Iran would make China the biggest loser because of that oil. There's also been some technology swapped as well. We're going to get to that here in a second. China supplied the Houthis in Yemen with their advanced missile technology. And you can watch this from a Chinese military analyst. But all of this at the bigger picture level is happening because China is trying to destabilize U.S. allies in the Middle East, but they're running out of allies left. Hezbollah severely neutered, Hamas severely neutered. The Houthis about to suffer the wrath of the Israelis, and the Israelis are very clear what they're going to do to the Houthis in Yemen, and the United States may join them in that effort because Yemen appears to be, at least verbally, breaking the ceasefire. Also, some interesting things. That's why you're going to see more intrigue occurring. According to China Uncensored, urgent action needed. The governor of a U.S. territory has died suddenly after calling for an FBI investigation into Chinese influence operations and corruption in his territory. Governor Arnold Palacios of the Commonwealth of Northern Mariana Islands has tried to root out corruption tied to CCP influence operations and Chinese money. Most recently, in April 2025, he sent a letter calling for an investigation and that he had considerable evidence to provide directly to the FBI. So this is something regarding if there really is an Indo-Pacific switch in priority for the U.S. military and the U.S. intelligence community, this needs to be a top priority for investigation. Because clearly, if the Chinese can't corrupt somebody, they could take them out. Not saying that happened in this situation, but at least an investigation needs to be started. Now, when we come back from the break, some dramatic statements from the UK and France regarding the Palestinians, and Netanyahu draws a very bright red line.
What if I told you you could convert your 401k or your IRA into gold? While your retirement is being beat up by a volatile stock market and inflation, it could instead be resting safely in physical gold at a place of your own choosing, including your own business. Look, gold has increased 50% in just the last year. Stock market, it's been nothing but a roller coaster. So protect your retirement from market chaos by calling Verity Metals today.
And we're back with the Middle East front. Keir Starmer announced that the UK will follow France's lead and will recognize a Palestinian state in September. Macron and Starmer have decided to reward Hamas. And that is accurate for attacking Israel and killing 1,000 people and then taking 251 hostages. I don't know what's going on. They're trying to appease their Muslim populations in each country. Europe needs to figure this out and vote these guys out of office and get their act together, as President Trump said. The Germans, however, seem to be doing the right thing. German Chancellor Merz, recognizing the state of Palestine at this time is not the right step. Within 48 hours, Jerusalem will decide whether to annex territory in the Gaza Strip if Hamas does not release the hostages. And yes, this is vastly different from the IDF simply capturing territory in the Strip. What they are planning to do is officially make that territory part of Israel. Now, there is a prophecy about this in the Bible about Gaza and Ashkelon being laid waste. That has happened. Now, will it become part of Israel? Well, here's the map. There would be some annexing step by step. It does require a supermajority of the 80 Knesset members or a national referendum. In other words, once annexed, the land doesn't come back without a political war in Israel. But as of right now, it seems like most Israelis would be on board for this if it was a national referendum. So that might be the direction that they go. So you can see here the settlements that are already under Israeli control. And you can see where they will probably start in the north and then on the buffer zone between Egypt. So this is a dramatically developing situation. And I'm sure there's going to be some last-minute attempts by the Europeans to try to intervene. But this may have been what Trump and Netanyahu met about here a couple weeks ago. American President Donald Trump warned Monday that the U.S. could bomb Iran's nuclear facilities again if Tehran appears to restart its nuclear program. If they do, we'll wipe it out faster than you can wave your finger at it, he said while in Scotland. He added that Iran has been giving nasty signals and the country's nuclear program will be eliminated if necessary. Iran's foreign minister, Abbas Araghchi, posted a response on X saying, if aggression is repeated, we will not hesitate to react in a more decisive manner, in a way that will be impossible to cover up. That sounds like a threat of the activation of sleeper cells in the United States, which, as we've talked about, is very likely a red button that they would hit in the event they thought there would be regime change that would actually succeed. The Ayatollah Khomeini does sound defeated. He said, quote, much to the enemy's dismay, we will be successful in increasing Iran's progress to a peak and to the pinnacle of honor, end quote. That does sound like he's defeated. That is a little bit deflated rhetoric from what he normally talks about. In addition to that, Iranian foreign minister said that he survived an assassination attempt during the 12-day war with Israel, revealing the bomb had been planted outside his residence. That's come out for the first time. I don't think the Israelis will miss next time if Iran continues down the road they're continuing. In Munich, Prince Reza Pahlavi spoke to reporters about the Convention of National Cooperation to Save Iran. He hosted this last weekend. And the bottom line that came out of that is the Iranian groups opposing the mullahs in Iran, well, they united finally. And that seems to be a very good sign indicating regime change in the near future. But we'll see. Iraqi Prime Minister Mohammed Shia al-Sudani revealed that his government has thwarted over 29 attempts by pro-Iran militias to launch missiles and drones toward Israel from Iraqi territory. Well, that is finally an admission that they actually took an affirmative role in keeping those Iranian proxies at bay. Also, a massive protest has erupted in the city of Shaba in rural Sweden as demonstrations are calling for an end to the siege and demanded international protection amid escalating tensions and humanitarian concerns. In other words, the Druze want to become part of Israel. U.S. envoy Tom Barak praised the SDF's leadership. Those are the Kurds or Kurdish-aligned militias in northern Syria, urging continued dialogue and unity under Syria's national framework. Syria is spiraling out of control, and we are very likely to see that partition here very soon. Many analysts are watching this carefully, but I don't know how this holds with a former al-Qaeda leader or current al-Qaeda leader in charge of Syria, and then them trying to wipe out certain populations in Israel, obviously having a strategic interest in those regions at the base of the Golan Heights and Mount Hermon. Also, and this, again, going very much underreported, Christians are being slaughtered in the Congo and Nigeria and Ethiopia. 40 people, including 21 worshipers attending a prayer vigil, were slaughtered in a machete attack. Open Door spokesman has described it as a killing spree in the Democratic Republic of Congo early Sunday morning. Thought the attack was perpetrated by the ADF, an Islamic group affiliated with the Islamic State. Yes, that is exactly what's going on, and they're going to continue to do that in Nigeria and throughout the Sahel. That brings us now to the Russia front. Russia wants to mine Niger's uranium, energy minister says, and this is again the Russia and Chinese influence operations and clear strategic occupation of the Sahel and Africa is becoming a national security concern for the United States of America for many different reasons. So, how do we deal with this going into the future? Well, perhaps it should be a new Monroe Doctrine, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. Poland revealed it has detained 32 suspects of collaborating with Russian intelligence to carry out sabotage, arson, and assaults. He confirmed the suspects include a Colombian, Russians, Ukrainians, Belarusians, and a Pole. One coordinator was brought to Poland. The threat from Russia will remain regardless of how the war in Ukraine ends, PM Tusk warns. Also, Ukrainian army continues to strike Russian logistics in the Kursk region, making life much harder on Russian soldiers. And a shift now, finally, the Ukrainians are attacking railway logistic hubs. We've kind of been asking that question, why that hasn't happened as much as you would think it would strategically. In the Rostov region last night, the automatic train control building and fuel tanker cars were hit in the attack. Also, you can see the melted and collapsed overhead electrical infrastructure. That electrical infrastructure is needed to move 70% of Russian locomotives. So here's the intelligence analysis on this. This is what is going to be attacked in the future because it's harder to replace. And the Ukrainians are going to try to shut down the Russians' ability to move goods, oil, gas on their rail lines. 70%. Remember that. Bookmark this. That we talked about it here on Patriot Radio. Russia is behind arson attacks in Poland carried out by a Colombian. Polish special services have stated that Colombian citizen was recruited by Russian intelligence to organize arson attacks in shopping centers. So that comes to explain some of the things that happened. Now here's a question. What about the arson that has happened here in the United States? Could that be Chinese intelligence, Iranian? Could it be Russian intelligence services, or all of the above? A great question, and I hope the FBI starts to investigate those widespread fires that seem to not have a really well explained cause. Lithuania deploys additional troops to Belarusian border after a second Russian drone violates its airspace. In other words, there is now a buildup on the border with Russia and the Baltic states. Now troops are moving there. We're going to keep our eyes on this, but a second incursion, I don't think, is by accident, and neither do the Lithuanians. Poland has secured another $4 billion U.S. loan guarantee to buy weapons, so that buildup, in fact, is being funded as well. That brings us now to the National Front. John Thune defies Trump and will not cancel August recess to ram through nominees as black-robed tyrants continue to sabotage president's agenda, according to Gateway Pundit. Yeah, this is the continuing rhino sabotage of what Trump wants to do. There are some options for him, but expect some announcements here in the next couple days to address that. Attorney General Pam Bondi ordered the FBI to investigate the vicious Cincinnati mob beating of a white man and a white woman. This has been all over social media, pretty outrageous. Now the DOJ is beginning to look into this. The issue is we gotta follow up on this. What actually happens out of these investigations, and is there real accountability? In addition, 20 to 25% of American Muslim adults are converts from Christianity and other faiths. A well-known Islamic influencer openly states what the plan is. We've been talking about this. The plan has always been Sharia law. Now, they're not going to say, if you go up to them and you say, well, your plan is Sharia law, they're saying, no, it isn't. We don't even know what Sharia law is. Don't use that term. Use the term Allah's divine law, because that's what they're talking about. Now, as Christians, Allah is not God. And as Christians, we need to be very clear on this and ask the right questions. But they're very clear in what they want to do. I wonder if the mainstream legacy media is going to say anything about that. Also, Jim Comey is in terrible trouble. His ambush of General Flynn was a targeted hit. I want to talk about this quickly. What's coming out from these newly declassified portions of the January 5th Rice email confirmed that the targeting of Flynn was coordinated within the inner sanctum of the White House, and that both Obama and Biden were deeply involved in the campaign to take him down. Now, the question, will there be a reckoning? Also, U.S. goods trade deficit unexpectedly shrunk in June. Unexpectedly? What are you talking about? Trump's approach to tariffs is working very clearly. And lastly, RFK Jr. blasts the corrupt and broken vaccine system and vows to overhaul the VICP and end HHS cover-ups for Big Pharma. You're going to see, again, some huge shifts in policy regarding vaccines and the requirement for actual double-blind studies, actual testing. And it's about time. He's doing a fantastic job there as secretary. Amazing. When we come back from the break, more on what's happening in the geopolitical sphere and what is the Monroe Doctrine. J. Michael Waller, when we come back.
What if I told you could convert your 401k or your IRA into gold? While your retirement is being beat up by a volatile stock market and inflation, it could instead be resting safely in physical gold at a place of your own choosing, including your own business. Look, gold has increased 50% in just the last year. Stock market, it's been nothing but a roller coaster. So protect your retirement from market chaos by calling Verity Metals today.
And we're back with our guest, J. Michael Waller, Senior Analyst for the Center for Security Policy, also the author of the great book, Big Intel. J. Michael Waller, it's great to have you back on Patriot Radio.
Great to be back with you.
So we're going to talk about something that, well, just a lot of people don't even know about. It's called the Monroe Doctrine. Unless you paid attention in high school history class, you may have heard of it. I don't know. But what is the Monroe Doctrine, and why is that going to be important going forward for a recalibration for our foreign policy here in the United States?
Well, the Monroe Doctrine was a set of guideposts or principles that were set up more than 200 years ago now by our last founding father, President James Monroe. And that was that any European empire seeking to build a foothold in the American hemisphere, where a republic has declared its independence, like all of Latin America, that would be viewed as a hostile act by the United States. And it's in the interests of the United States to have free, sovereign neighbors who are completely safe from the big foreign empires outside the hemisphere. So that was our doctrine leading up to really when President Kennedy let it slip by allowing Fidel Castro to stay in power. And it's gone downhill ever since until Obama formally renounced it. Says, oh no, we're not going to have anything to do with that anymore. That era is over. So President Trump supports bringing back the Monroe Doctrine as a way of ensuring not just the safety of our southern border, but our trade, our shipping routes, our immigration, smuggling issues, all of the other problems in the hemisphere, but also all the other opportunities in the hemisphere, not just to keep out the noxious European empires, of which really Russia's the last one, but also China, Iran, jihadism, and even globalism.
So right now, I mean, Venezuela, clearly Iran has a foothold there, Russia in Cuba, China in, well, many different places, but for probably the biggest priority, Panama right now. So how does this work now in the modern era with the Monroe Doctrine? People don't even know who President James Monroe was, the last of the founding fathers who was actually president. How does this work here right now? Because you have a lot of people saying, well, that's just going to justify American empire and intervention all over Latin America.
Well, first, why would an American complain about dominating the hemisphere? Well, we want somebody else to dominate it?
Right.
So if we don't dominate it, somebody else will. And that's the whole idea of the Monroe Doctrine. Not to dominate for the sake of controlling or dominating, but for being the one safeguarding the hemisphere to keep other hostile empires and powers out.
So has China really gotten a good foothold in Latin America? I don't think many people understand what China's been doing right in our backyard.
Oh, a big foothold. So when you hear the Navy talk about the Indo-Pacific and the shift from Europe to China, for some reason, everybody's overlooking our own southern border in that case. But the Indo-Pacific means Pacific, which means the west coast of the United States and the west coast of our continents all the way down to Antarctica. So that means the Americas. And so the pivot toward Indo-Pacific on our side is very wise, but they're looking at the far off Indo-Pacific, not the Indian Ocean and Pacific Ocean. They're not looking at the Pacific that's part of the Americas. And that's really where we need to be concentrating, not to be an interventionist power abroad, but to simply keep hostile powers away. So when you have China coming in with its Belt and Road Initiative, building these huge commercial enterprises, these huge seaports, airports, that's all well and good, but there are two problems with it. The first one is it hooks these countries into a debt they cannot repay. And the agreements for the Chinese financing of these huge projects is that if you can't pay, we're going to repo the port. And by repossessing the port, they mean take actual national sovereignty over that port. So think of the port of Long Beach. All of a sudden becomes Chinese sovereign territory where Americans can no longer have any authority. It's that type of thing, but down across our hemisphere. That's why when President Trump came in earlier this year, he was so brutally decisive on the Panama Canal, because Panama had become a beachhead for communist China.
Yeah, we've seen it still languishing right now. C.K. Hutchison saying there has to be a Chinese investor involved. Of course there does. They want to still maintain some kind of control. How do you think that's going to play out?
Well, a good Monroe Doctrine would be keep Chinese Communist Party influence out of our hemisphere. It's not welcome. And it's not simply a question of us saying, no, you can't do that. It's a question of making sure there are institutions in place that can provide that financing in cases where the financing for normal private capital, it might be too risky. And this is where we created our great institutions for containing Soviet communism in the Cold War. Those institutions are still around, but we've allowed China under the tent. China's part of these institutions now, but they're not fully in. So we need to push them out.
So one of those is the Organization of American States that most people have never heard of. Trump has defunded, as I understand it, because you've raised the alarm on this. Can you explain what the organization is, what its purpose originally was, and how you think it's going to play into geopolitics here in this hemisphere in the near future?
The Organization of American States was set up as part of the American containment doctrine in the early part of the Cold War to stop communist subversion. Great role. So it's like it's not NATO because it's not a military alliance. It's not a UN because it's not, but it's an international body of all the countries in the hemisphere except Cuba, which got kicked out when Castro took power. And they meet in Washington, where their headquarters is, and they discuss problems and figure out common solutions. So it makes sense in certain ways for us to have this, because then, let's say you've got an international drug trafficking problem, you can easily assemble all the government chiefs in charge of law enforcement or against organized crime and drug trafficking, and they can meet under this neutral ground, and they can all meet as sort of equal collaborators or partners, even though objectively they don't have equal resources, but some have problems far worse than we do. So we can work to help one another and then help standardize laws and regulations for enforcement and extradition and so forth. So it makes a lot of sense, and it works to our benefit. The problem is, what happens when you ignore these institutions and they go woke, and you pack them full of woke people, and so they stop supporting the American national interest? And then what President Trump is doing right now is reconsidering, is it even worthwhile to have the Organization of American States to host it, to fund half of its budget and of these other things, or are we getting a raw deal?
Well, the Chinese and their revenge for the opium wars are sending precursor chemicals regarding fentanyl and carfentanil into South America. Nothing really is being done to stop it. I know there's kind of the window dressing out of Mexico. Oh, hey, we seized this much. It's the most we've ever seized, but really isn't putting a dent in the problem. Does the OAS play a role in this in the future, or do you think the United States is going to have to do bilateral agreements and go it alone?
No, the OAS does a lot on this. It requires U.S. leadership. So we have the DEA and the State Department and others working together. A lot of these countries really want to fight this. It's just their societies are too corrupt, or they're just too out-financed, or they're outgunned, and they need extra help. And that's where we have a cooperative relationship where it's win-win. So I think Colombia had an insurgency that was a generation long narco insurgency, and they're still exporting cocaine to the United States because this is where the market is, and the elites of this country love to use it. So there's not going to be an end to the cocaine production unless there's an end to the cocaine demand. And as for fentanyl, which is a bilateral issue that we're working with Mexico, really a lot of Mexican police officers and political figures have lost their lives fighting the fentanyl war.
There have been, but there's still this underlying tie between the government and the cartels. They deny it, but I mean, there's quite a bit of information out there right now that at least shows some smoke coming up, if not fire. How do we deal with that? in Mexico? Because, I mean, they are right on our southern border, and there has been a lot of pushback by President Trump, but it seems like the Mexicans are just trying to bide their time.
Well, they're biding their time because Trump has not appointed an ambassador to the Organization of American States. He's named him, but the ambassador hasn't been confirmed by the Senate. So we have a career State Department person serving as our ambassador there. He's not standing up for Trump's principles. You still don't have a assistant secretary in the State Department that would be the top guy responsible for the Western Hemisphere. Trump hasn't even named the person now. So it's all Biden holdovers and careerists, a few political appointees, but mostly the careerists and the holdovers who are running the day-to-day operations of that. So we're not making that progress we should. What you do see, though, President Sheinbaum of Mexico, who's a radical leftist, she can't stand the United States and hates Trump even more, but she has a great working relationship with him because she's scared to death of him.
Right.
She's very eager to cooperate. In fact, not just do lip service. I mean, she's going through the motions on some things, but she's really cooperating with us, in fact. And that's because Trump says, I'm going to turn the screws on you so hard that you're going to be screaming in bloody pain. So why don't you just be a good neighbor?
And it's working, at least as of right now. When we come back from the break, more with J. Michael Waller, senior analyst for the Center for Security Policy. We're going to be talking about the new revelations on the Russia hoax and Spygate, and also the sudden shift of Donald Trump regarding Vladimir Putin.
What if I told you could convert your 401k or your IRA into gold? While your retirement is being beat up by a volatile stock market and inflation, it could instead be resting safely in physical gold at a place of your own choosing, including your own business. Look, gold has increased 50% in just the last year. Stock market, it's been nothing but a roller coaster. So protect your retirement from market chaos by calling Verity Metals today.
And we're back with our guest, J. Michael Waller, the author of Big Intel, one of the premier books here in the last 2 years, and really prescient, especially with some of the revelations that are coming out of Washington, D.C. right now regarding the Russia hoax and Spygate. How are you receiving this news that's coming out in the declassified email regarding Susan Rice, kind of the CYA email she sent on her last day? How are you processing this and analyzing this, and what do you think is going to happen? Is there going to be accountability?
Well, the revelations that we're seeing from Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard, and the hints that FBI Deputy Director Dan Bongino is sending out on X, really show that there's going to be a revolutionary shift in the way our intelligence services work and in the lack of accountability that there's been. So the fight's not over yet. It's just begun. I have no idea which side is going to win, but you certainly do have a very dedicated team around the president that's trying to get to the bottom of this. So the fact that these memos are seeing the light of day at all is a really big deal. And even though some of them are weakly written or lamely written or could be a lot stronger, it doesn't matter. It's still getting out there, and there's still a big breadcrumb trail to follow. And the fact that the Justice Department is taking these cases as criminal referrals is a huge deal, because then people are going to be held accountable.
I mean,
will we get to watch Obama in prison? I really doubt it, but at least there's going to be accountability.
And will there be restructuring? I mean, that's really what you've talked about in Big Intel. Is there going to be a meaningful, let me add that modifier to it, a meaningful restructuring of the intelligence community?
I doubt it. There's no real commitment to it. I think that the administration's view is we want to keep these as powerful institutions so we can clean up the mess that we inherited. So there's some logic to it. I don't agree with that approach. I think you can do both at the same time, but perhaps the easiest and the most streamlined way is to keep the structures essentially as they are. You've seen the FBI getting bigger under Kash Patel. They absorbed the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. They've taken on other roles. As opposed to shrinking the FBI's power, they've expanded it and then deployed those forces to fight illegal immigration and other things. So they've taken a different approach to the problem. But I'm very concerned that they will, when Trump is no longer president, they'll leave us holding the bag with a legacy of a more powerful than ever FBI.
And that is the concern. I mean, Dan Bongino's tweet, as you mentioned, where he said that he was shocked to his core. We can't run a republic this way. I'm curious as to is this really that big of a revelation to him? I mean, you would think he would have access to that information when he was doing podcasts and talk shows, but it sounds like maybe that's not the case, and that what they've discovered right now is that there indeed was a weaponization of the intelligence community against political rivals. And can we ever really come back from that?
Well, let's look at America as that we are a body politic, right? But let's look at it as you would a human person's body. You have, you might have some kind of skin cancer. It's probably type, stage 1 or stage 2. Not a big deal. We can fix it. And then you go in from the inside and it's stage 4 melanoma. Okay, so you knew there was something bad there, but you thought it was manageable. You go in and you find it's far worse than you ever imagined. And then it becomes overwhelming. So a lot of folks are out there, a lot of friends of mine saying, you got to squeeze Bongino and Cash Patel really harder to do this. They're not doing anything over there. Yeah. They're not doing what we want. That's crazy talk. I mean, these guys are working all hours of the day on a million things, doing a hostile takeover of a 37,000 person organization while trying to fight all of these threats that we're facing and discovering all of these terrible things that Bongino's talking about on X.
I mean, it's a big ask to try to shift the culture to a disinterested, true intelligence analysis of the threats to the United States of America when it has been so weaponized over the last few years. And, I'm not trying to be, hopeless on something like that, but I mean, that is a big ask. I think we do need to acknowledge it like you're saying.
Sure. And you think of the way the hiring practices changed. So over, say, in 2010, 2012, somebody comes on, 22-year-old straight out of Harvard or something. Right. They're given an unusual amount of power and the cockiness that goes along with it and the impunity that goes along with it. And they can push around and threaten people who've been on the job 20 or 30 years. Well, that was 10 years ago, 12 years ago. So now they're mid-career professionals. And under DEI, a lot of them have been artificially promoted to senior leadership positions, regardless of their qualifications, and they're running the show. So you can see how demoralizing their presence would be among the professionals in these agencies, and then how that's going to affect what to look for in terms of threats, how to analyze those threats, how to synthesize all the information that's coming in from all these different sources, and then come to some sort of intelligence community consensus with a high degree of confidence on what these threats are to provide it to the president so that the president and his team can decide what to do about it.
I've seen the analysis that didn't really take into account any of the Soviet defectors, any of the folks that had the high level access in the former Soviet Union about the strategy, the generational strategy that the communists have had against the United States. And now we're at a point where it's suddenly shocking to Trump that Putin isn't really a nice guy. He's not really a good guy to work with. What accounts for this shift, do you think?
Well, it's a strange thing because in the intelligence world, your adversaries can also become your helpers. So on the one hand, Putin is a very bad guy, but some of us knew this a long time ago. Putin had 2 members of my editorial board assassinated.
Oh, wow.
So I take it very personally. But when he took over as president of Russia in 1999, early 2000, the liberals were fine with him. It wasn't until he kicked out the Soros organizations that they started turning against him. But he's the same guy. He was a KGB man who murdered people. So he's still there. But at the same time, when we had the war in Afghanistan and we needed to get so much of our equipment in there, how do you bring it into a landlocked country like Afghanistan? You have either Pakistan or the former Soviet Union to the north of Afghanistan. Those are the only ways to bring things, or Iran, which was out of bounds. So we were sending U.S. was sending its equipment up to Riga, Latvia in the Baltic Sea, and then Putin allowed us to send it by train across Russia into Central Asia and then down through the stands into Afghanistan. So you can work with the guy on certain things where it's of mutual interest. Putin's secret police also tipped off the FBI twice about the Boston Marathon bombers, and we didn't do anything about it. Mm-hmm. So it's not like you can't work with these guys. But the shift you have on Putin right now in terms of Trump is that Trump really looked to Putin as a peer level person who he could deal with. Strong man, he can make his own decisions, doesn't need a parliament or a Congress or anything or a court to tell him what he can and can't do. He's just going to make him, and he's just going to make deals. He misread Putin, and he's gotten burned for it. And so now he's changed his approach.
And do you think that in the future that's going to be, you think it's going to be more of an adversarial relationship, especially since the comments of 50 days is now down to 12 or something like that in regards to sanctions?
Remember, he gave the Iranians 60 days to clean up their act, and look what happened to them on day 61.
Yeah.
I don't think he's going to bomb Russia. I mean, that would be, it's not necessary and it would be suicidal. But I think he's lost his patience with Putin, and he's no longer giving Putin the benefit of the doubt that, hey, maybe we can get him to stop the war in Ukraine. He doesn't have anybody around him who really knows Russia and the Russian mentality. That's another thing with the Trump administration. He's overdue in reshaping the National Security Council. That's the interagency professional staff that's brought into the executive office of the president to advise on national security matters, along with his political appointees around him who direct it. So that's why you have Seb Gorka in there directing counterterrorism. He's doing an amazing job. But then you have nobody there for all these other different parts of the world, which is an information vacuum, and then a network vacuum, because the White House can't reach out and say, hey, call so-and-so in this agency or even this country and see what we can do to work this thing out. There's no one there yet.
How do we get people? I agree with you 100%. It's a perfect segue. How do we get people in there that actually understand the Russian mentality? And I'm talking about people maybe that lived in the former Soviet Union. They're now Americans and have been for a very long time. We're in the underground church in the former Soviet Union that really understand that mentality, but also understand what it means to be an American. How do we get folks like that in there that would be a great asset for advising the president?
Well, first they need to apply, because really a lot of people haven't applied. A lot of really qualified people haven't bothered, or they feel intimidated or think, well, it's just me. What do I know? But really, so let's say you're a Christian pastor who's been persecuted by the KGB and you know the whole Russian mentality. You're not going to be a national security threat. You just go through your background check, and there's infinite number of roles you can play in the administration dealing with Russia. But those types of folks really aren't applying. So if they don't apply, who does apply? On the other hand, a lot of really qualified, solid people do apply, and they get overlooked.
They do, and that's where I would love to see maybe a fresh look at all of those people. So big intel, a lot of people have been mentioning it online and on social media recently. Just in a couple of minutes, how do you think it's going to play a role in informing people in the next 6 months? And of course, give it a plug where people can go by.
Well, big intel is about how the FBI and the CIA went from Cold War heroes to deep state villains. So it's a history story in some ways. It's a counterintelligence story about how the Soviets sought to infiltrate our societies and undermine us from within with cultural Marxism, and how that cultural Marxism, or critical theory as they like to call it, infiltrated the whole intellectual base of our national security community, like our educational system also, or so much of our society, even our churches. But it also infiltrated the FBI and the CIA, whose job was what? Was to protect us against all this. So that's what the book is about, and it goes back a century, but the real meat of it is, how was it physically and systematically and deliberately implemented in the FBI and CIA? And that was under the Obama administration. So I go through that. Who did it? What were the executive order numbers? What are the things that happened? What were people saying? And then how did Trump in his first term didn't understand the problem?
Yeah,
most Americans didn't understand the problem. They thought, the FBI is the good guys. There's some bad elements in there, but we just replace the bad elements. But no, you've got cultural rot inside that organization, as with the CIA, and it's taken place for a couple of professional generations of people. So the book is about that, and then it's an architecture of what do you do from this point on. So my approach is really the opposite of what the Trump administration has chosen to do. I had said the FBI, we should keep all of its functions, merge them with other agencies that do this kind of work. So you have your U.S. Marshals handle all criminal investigations. and all federal law enforcement training. We don't need an ATF and an FBI doing firearms crimes. So move all the FBI firearms stuff into ATF and then deal with ATF as a separate problem. Create a standing counterintelligence service outside the FBI, because FBI works really hard chasing spies. It just doesn't do a very good job finding those high level ones. So create a new standing counterintelligence service all of its own. And as you go through, you realize there's nothing left for an FBI, so just shut it down. But we keep all of the functions. So the Trump administration has taken the opposite approach. And also, you shrink the size of the federal law enforcement bureaucracy and shrink their power so they can't abuse the public the way they did, up and probably doing it still now. And then you also return a lot more powers back to the states, help the states develop their own capabilities. And for states that can't afford to do it, you'd use federal block grants that would have come out of the old FBI budget to fund states to give them block grants so they can decide what to do with it to develop their own capabilities.
Yeah, just efficiency in investigations and prosecution would be a massive sea change and would be very welcome, I think, and our adversaries would take note. J. Michael Waller, as always, what a pleasure and a great conversation. Appreciate everything you're doing and keep up the fight.
Thank you. Good to see you again.
CenterForSecurityPolicy.org. Sign up for their newsletter, and you can find big intel on virtually every major bookstore. Check out that work. It is incredible because he names the names, but he also gives the solutions. So he's not just dwelling on the problems. Fantastic, fantastic book. So what can you do? Well, one of the things is read big intel. And number two, if you're one of those pastors who was persecuted in the former Soviet Union and you understand Russian mentality, but you also understand what it means to be an American and the worldview of America, and you are an American, apply. We need good people to give advice and counsel, especially in this time. People who've actually been there and understand the mentality, understand the language, understand the history, and who want to see things truly change for the better. This is Matt Shea. Thank you for joining me on Patriot Radio today. May God bless all of you. He is making this generation the greatest one. And remember, despite all the discouragement, the awakening is here. So keep up the fight.